My next pleasure is to introduce our keynote speaker, Matt Coleman. So Matt is the Executive Director at Inflexion, which was formerly the Educational Policy Improvement Centre at the University of Oregon. For those of you who need to know these things, that is the home of the Ducks. So that's the university to go to if you have an affinity for ducks and prestigious sporting events. Fighting Ducks. Fighting Ducks. Matt and I and his colleague Paul Beach have been working for some time on creating a way of being able to document whole school improvement and school success, and using an electronic technology to be able to give us a running record of school improvement over time. We think that this work is incredibly important for schools to document the hard work and the learning that you do every day and to celebrate that. There is no more important work than the work that you do, and I will defy anybody who tells me different. Teaching is rocket science, and you guys have the biggest responsibility of anyone in the career and workforce to create the rocket scientists of the future, inspire them and keep them going to reach their full potential. So Matt's biodata is in your program. I'll let you read that. He's inspired me. Matt, welcome to what I hope is just your first visit to Australia.
All right, I have to prove a couple of things. One is, I am told I have a face for radio, which means that, if I bore you, just close your eyes, because I'm told I have a deep, soothing voice, so at least get a little bit of rest this morning. I appreciate being here. I am thrilled and honored to stand before the people that do, as Claire said, the most important work anywhere. I share your passion, and we at our organization share your passion for all kids. And specifically kids, and the way we talk about it at Inflexion, kids furthest from opportunity, and making sure that they have what all kids deserve, what we want for our own kids, what I certainly want for my 4 kids. Now, what I want to do is I want to tell you a story, and I want you to be thinking about, over the next 10, 15 minutes of my time, but also the 3 days that you're going to spend learning as individuals and collectively as teams. I want you thinking about the concept of me and we. And I'm going to take you to a place in Oregon, which is this beautiful scene. It's about 4 years ago for me, where I was at a wedding that was near a river in the mountains. It was crazy. In Oregon, we have 2 seasons. We have a short, dry season, and we have a long, wet season. This was during the short, dry season. Beautiful greens, far away from cities. 300 people came to this place. I drove 2 hours to get there for this wedding. And at the reception, the wedding was beautiful. We get to the reception, there's 300 people underneath these tents. And the father of the bride gets up and he says some really nice things. And he starts with, the grandparents and the siblings and everybody that's been involved in getting and helping get his daughter to that point. I'm sitting there kind of going, God, okay, great, that was cool. The father of the groom stands up, and he looks, and he starts to tear up, and he looks across the 300 people that are in attendance, and he points to a woman, and he says, Miss Susan, please stand. And I'm serious, I've got the chills on the back of my neck as I think about this. As Miss Susan stands, he points to her, and he says, if not for her, none of us would be here today. And then he proceeds to tell the story of Miss Susan and the role she played in her son's life. This young man was in what we called at the time in the States a behavior classroom. This young man had a behavior disorder that kept him from being in the mainstream. This young man was furthest from opportunity in terms of thinking about where he could go. And it was Miss Susan who had him in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. It was Miss Susan who was that individual teacher, that's the me in me and we. He spoke to, the father of the groom, spoke to the fact that it was the work she did with his son that allowed him to excel in high school, that allowed him to go to university, that allowed him to become essentially a park ranger, to have a career where he actually met his wife. And it was for me in that moment, and I've been in education at that time about 20 years. I've been a large high school principal, large middle school principal, had taught at both the middle school and the high school level, and worked at the university. It was at that moment where I really felt and understood the power of the teacher, the power of what you all do day in and day out over the course of the year. And I think of it as the power of me, the power, not me, but you, me, right? The power that you have to influence not just one single life, but 300 of us that had come together in that moment. And I think about what that means and what the work that Miss Susan did on behalf of this one child in first, second, and third grade that allowed him to have the wild success that he has had and continues to have. There's a we part, and this is where I get excited about AVID. What you guys do in Australia, and the reason, honestly, we jumped on the plane and flew 15 hours was not for me to stand in front of you, because this makes me nervous. I had a high school of 2,700 kids, and I'm more nervous talking to 400 educators than I am 2,700 kids. But why we came, we being Paul and myself, is that we are so excited to learn from you. We had a session yesterday with some principals from around Australia to think about how do we implement AVID school-wide better. The reason we are interested in that is because when I think about the me and the we, when I think about Miss Susan, it wasn't just Miss Susan who impacted that kid. Don't get me wrong. She was the lightning rod. She was the one that made things happen. But she had a we that was behind her. And the way that we think about this in the work that we do is we have a way of thinking, which is this idea that school identity informs the structures that support the learning that empowers student readiness. And when we think about this, we think about what does it mean to be ready? It means a holistic definition. I've seen some of the initial work with VU's innovation around the first year. And what I love about it is that it recognizes that when students come to university, it's just not about their ability to read, write, and do math. There are whole subsets of metacognitive skills that need to be baked into your approach. What program bakes that into your approach? Well, that's right, it would be AVID. It would be the wicker strategies that those kids beautifully talked about. When we think about our approach, when I think about Miss Susan and the role that she played in her school, and specifically around these kids, this now grown adult, the big idea for her was that at the time, we treated kids in the States with behavior disorders as if the only thing they needed to be working on is regulating their own behavior, self-regulation. The reality for Miss Susan is she said, this kid's got a brain, and these kids have brains, and we need to nurse those brains. We need to be working on their ability to regulate their own behavior and to do what they need to do. But we need to recognize that there's something going on up here that needs to be valued and needs to be nourished. The beauty of thinking in that way, and what we love about AVID, is the fact that AVID takes that approach. It recognizes the interplay between the cognitive and the metacognitive. It recognizes that readiness and the concept of academics is not just about cognitive, there's a metacognitive component. When I think about Miss Susan, what I think about in terms of the we that was behind her, her focus was on instructional design. Her focus was on what was happening for her kids day in and day out, and what could she do to support their learning. And again, this mindset of learning that empowers readiness, and for this particular individual, the kind of readiness that has allowed him to be wildly successful in life. That learning, and when we think about learning, this is where the me lives. This is what most of you in the room who are working directly day in and day out with students, this is what you do day in and day out. This is where the magic happens. This is the me, is at this point of learning. What the we is around the structures that support it. And when you think about AVID, there's all kinds of structures that support it. There's all kinds of systems and processes and practices. When I think about Miss Susan, when she went to her principal, she got to that school, and for students in her classroom, their primary strategy was when the kids would blow out in terms of behavior, they actually went into a soft room, a literal soft room. When she asked the instructional aides, what's your role in instruction in this classroom? They said, oh, we're a doorstop. So kids could go in and kind of de-escalate themselves. Miss Susan says, no, that's not going to work for me. When she went to the principal and she went to the staff as a whole, collectively, she asked for them to rethink the processes and practices that they, as a school, had engaged in to support these students. And I'm not going to get into the specifics, but the whole school embraced supporting these handful of kids furthest from opportunity. And it was the supports that came from the structures that they put in play. Now, those structures are informed or driven by this concept of identity. And when we think of identity, and a lot of times in the AVID work, we talk a lot about culture. When we think of identity and where we see AVID implementation off the charts, is when the elements of values and beliefs and mental models, or the ways that we see the world, are shared amongst the collective, amongst the we. What we see are structures that support the type of learning that you as individual teachers want to deliver for all kids. That's where, and when I think about the father standing up, and I think about him in the role that he played and what he talked about in terms of his son, that's where this concept of me and we starts to resonate. It is about what you do individually, and over the next several days, you're going to have an opportunity to improve your own practice. It's also about what you do collectively. I love the concept of open up and reach out. Because part of what that says to me from a leadership perspective, I believe leadership is ability to influence. And there's 420 plus people in this room that have the ability to influence. There's 420 people in this room that have to lead, whether you're in a formal role or not. Take the ideas of AVID school-wide and collectively help your staff embrace them. Take your identity as a school. I mean, can you tell me that the elementary school that we just saw, can you tell me there's not a sense of identity there? That there's not a sense of understanding of who we are, most importantly from the mouth of babes, from kids, from children? Identity informs the kind of structures that support the type of teaching and learning that empowers all students. I go back to that place, and I think about that one teacher, and I think about the fact that she was asked to stand before the grandparents, before the siblings, before anyone else. And I go back to what he said, what the father of the groom said, if not for this woman, none of us would be here. That's the power in the work you do. Recognize the role you play, both as an individual, the me, but then also the role you play in the collective in terms of the school as a whole. I'm thrilled to be here, and I so appreciate the work that you do. We know in the work that we do the power that AVID brings. We know the results that become possible for all kids when you do it well. And we wish you the best of luck in your endeavors, and enjoy the next 3 days with a focus on me and we. Thank you.